A traditional interior. That's what we want to look at today. The challenge is trying to remodel anything that is existing and trying to incorporate elements that are timeless. It's a challenge, and I'll show you why. Number two, creating that today, you have to have, if you're an interior designer, you have to have essentially a traditionally trained architect or residential home designer in order to have the canvas that permits you to do traditional stuff. And the underlying principle in all of this is this word right here, order. And what I mean by that is in the day, let's do a quick little history. In the day in traditional homes, because of the nature of the materials that they used, you could only build a home a certain way because they were using actual 2x4s or 2x8s or 2x6s, or they were using actual stone or brick in order to construct their house. And when you do that, you are limited by the physical properties of the materials, right? So you're limited by an arch to span an opening. If I've got a wall, and this is all brick looking in section, and I've got a wall, this is all brick looking in section, I can either put a joist here that's wood, or I can do an arch to actually span that. And so these openings ended up being certain sizes. They were limited in the width of what they could be based on the physical properties of the materials they were being constructed with. That is the most important thing to understand about traditional design, because that sets up your understanding regarding what you should do with what you have when you're designing new or trying to incorporate or remodel an old house, meaning 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. So, back in the day, houses were very simple, typically rectangular, typically had openings that you could look at with room configurations, and oftentimes you'd have the central hall in here. Oh man, let me do that again. I shouldn't have drawn those lines, or at least should have drawn them in a different color. We'll do that next time. So the idea of the room, that's what we want to explore and look at right now. So this idea of the room, I'm going to get this just a little bit bigger on here so you can see it better. I'm so used to drawing this tiny little thing, it's probably going to be way better if you can see it like this. And so let's say this is the opening, right? And so you'll come in, you'll have some sort of cased opening that goes into a room. And then you'll have some sort of other cased opening that go into another room. And then typically in a lot of these old colonials, you'll have central stair hall. That would be an opening. Fireplace, opening, room. And then additions would happen and they just bust out the back and just keep adding stuff in the back, right? But you have these rooms that just have cased openings, and that's how he did it. So what happened with the advent of modern design and engineered materials? That's the most important thing. It's like, okay, so now we're using steel. What's interesting is the Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Roby house in Chicago, was one of the first ones to use an open floor plan concept. Still maintained a lot of those general principles, but really dematerialized all the walls and got rid of this cased opening idea. And so what do you get when you have this idea? You have order because you have perfect resolution of all of the rooms. So in here, whether, depending on what I want to do with the floor pattern, I know exactly how to be able to lay that out to get a really nice resolution for all of my moldings, both base, chair rail, and crown, ceiling, reflected ceiling plans, beams, beamwork, light locations. Even though in old historic homes they were always either sconces or something else, very rarely did you actually have center light locations or can lights because there weren't lights. But what happens, the principle of it is each room is a self-contained, cohesive, fully resolved geometry which enables you to fully resolve each molding and system easily within itself. And that's why traditional homes feel timeless. That's why they work so much. So if we go to the evolution of the home, what did we start doing? Especially, and so, okay, what did we start doing? It was the 50s where they started doing some really, weird things, and started doing open floor plans and doing just random stuff that looked like this, super modern. And the reality is some of the stuff is super, super cool, but you can't resolve any of it because it wasn't meant to be resolved. It's just open space. And so with this particular, if I call that 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, call this a stair hall or some giant chimney that is between both of them. What do I do with that? How do I resolve those things? Well, depending, and so what's crazy is all of a sudden the window systems will be in some odd spot that doesn't have to do with the room either. And so because of the advent of engineered materials, we can now span things and dematerialize the corners. Up here, because of the structural nature of what these rooms were, that corner had to be there, because this was probably going to be some bearing wall that was probably masonry, just like the exteriors were, or at least on the inside some sort of bearing wall. And this also, the joists were running this way, and so we had to maintain it. Whereas now this, it's like, oh, we now have a steel beam and we now have engineered lumber that can span all sorts of lengths, and we don't need to have the same sort of resolution that we had before. And it's novel, it's cool, it's new, and it's like, hey, let's do it. And there were honestly some genius architects that did it, regardless of how you feel about how ugly those houses were. Some of them weren't, some of them were, but you end up with an unresolvable floor plan and no order. Now, can you take this and turn it into order? Yes, you take off the roof, you reconfigure all the windows, you're like, all right, I now have room. Let's redo something with this. Let's have some sort of resolution. And so what we're trying to do is turn everything still into a room to have a fully resolved, fully cohesive thing, and then make sure that my openings and my connections still work. And one of the issues that we have is the dematerialization of walls in order to maintain visual connectivity. For the layperson, what that means, we're just the open floor plan so we can actually see each other when we're in the kitchen, the dining, and the living room. And because we don't like, most of us, a lot of us are kind of going back to it because we're like, man, we miss those intimate, cute, wonderful spaces that are charming. They really are. They're charming. You can't deny that. But what most people still want is that ability to see each other in different rooms so the whole family or group can interact with each other when they're in the kitchen in particular. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how to dematerialize each of these things, but more importantly, how to address the corners so that we can properly resolve stuff. And so we can go back to the whole cased opening thing. We can put a nice little arch there. We can put a nice little arch there. We can cut this off and make the room that way so that now that's open and then that's open. So there's different strategies in terms of space planning that we can do in order to accommodate the lack of order within the space, maintain the visual connectivity, and introduce some order so that you can actually do it. So this was modernist stuff. The 80s, 90s, and 2000s did a whole new variation on a theme that was even more problematic. Is because we started doing all the bubble diagrams, all this stuff, right? And so what happens when we do that is you end up with a large great room back here, something like that, with a kitchen or a dining room and a kitchen, and then some stair hall and an entryway and an office and a master bedroom back there, and then a pantry and something else that then relates to or goes to a garage. And all of a sudden, when we have houses that literally look like this in plan, they might as well. The lack of straight lines, it's hilarious. I actually like this, that's funny. What do you notice about this? This corner right here, if you got rid of it, it screws it up. That corner, none of these, this right here doesn't relate to anything down here. So I look at this and I'm like, how do I roof this thing? There is no order in this house, no resolvable order, nothing. You can't get it. You cannot get it because none of this stuff actually relates to anything else in terms of any of these lines. This is the so-called form follows function. There's no discipline in a design like this, none whatsoever, no design discipline. It's just, oh, we'll just make it and it looks cool. And literally, go to floor plans, pull them up. You'll see that a lot of them look kind of like this. And so remodeling these houses is by far the most challenging remodels that I do. Because we are gutting this thing, reconfiguring tons of stuff in these spaces. And this is primarily from the 80s on, 90s and 2000s. That's where we deal with this. The homes from the 50s we can still work with that. The homes from the 70s, what's interesting is because the nature of their roof lines, particularly in my location in the Mountain West, you can't turn those into traditional things unless you just have to demo them in order to get any sort of traditional anything on them. And so, but these homes, they're very hard to salvage because there is no order within any of this stuff. They've just dematerialized rooms and so, I mean, literally, that corner and that corner won't align. That corner won't align. That corner doesn't align. And there's no alignments, no visual alignments. So when we're looking to do, if you're an interior designer or residential designer and you're trying to do something that looks more traditional, you have to conceptualize your entire design from the outset, from the beginning, in the idea of the room, where it's the best thing you can do for yourself is to start with a fully closed, cohesive room that actually does have an opening. Figure out where those openings are related to the adjacent spaces and the adjacent rooms, and then begin to dematerialize corners and have that in mind when you're doing this, so you're maintaining visual axes and connectivities and how those actually align to each other. And when you do that, you will have a foundation that easily supports any sort of traditional moldings and floor patterns and reflected ceiling plans. And if you don't start that way, it is just, you're going to be fighting it the whole way, and you'll have to make up for whatever you've got. Now, the irony with all of this is that we've all grown up with and in spaces that are more like this than like this. There were, I think, 20 million residences in the US prior to 1920, which had something similar to this in terms of their overall layout. And guess what? We still go vacation all those spaces, look at all those places, and tour those places because they have character and it's really cool. Then we spent 100 years building random weird houses that have no order. And we're trying to reclaim timeless like historic design in a manner that actually we don't have to remodel every single decade because it's out of fashion, out of trend. We want stuff that's a little bit more permanent, a little more long, has in its lifespan, like the old school stuff. In order to do that, you have to start at the very beginning, which is a fundamental underlying sense of order within the house. So if you're a residential designer, if you're an interior designer, that's the beginning.